Right, morning all. Morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Okay, let me just do the Facebook and we'll start in a minute.
You've got a frog in your throat like mine.
Yes, unfortunately.
Those frogs get everywhere.
They do indeed. Like next week's Cedra. I think.
That's true, yes.
Right, morning all. Okay. Okay, feels like it's been a long time since we've done this. Actually.
It is.
Right. Okay, so about to start. Just sharing. We are going live any minute now. Right, here we go. Okay.
Rabbi, we're going to be on mute most of the time because we're at Esther's.
Oh, okay. I wondered about the background. Okay, no worries. Right. I'm assuming all the other muted people are with us and can hear us. I hope so. Right, I'm going to share the screen. So shall I ask you to read, Pam, or not?
Iris reading.
No, I'm saying, shall I ask you and Julian to read at some point?
Yes, we can. We will. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'm on mute for that, but
No
Deborah,
worries.
Rabbi, Deborah just said she couldn't unmute.
Oh, that's strange. Maybe, oh, there might be a security setting. Just give me a sec. How do I do this? Security. You should be able to.
I'll manage now.
Oh, good. Good. Right. Right. Oh, it's got new options. Okay. So, right, off we go. Now it's over to you, Iris.
Okay, hang about. The children of Israel multiply in Egypt. Threatened by their growing numbers, Pharaoh enslaves them and orders the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to kill all male babies at birth. When they do not comply, he commands his people to cast the Hebrew babies into the Nile. A child is born to Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, and her husband Amram, and placed in a basket on the river while the baby's sister Miriam stands watch from afar. Pharaoh's daughter discovers the boy, raises him as her son, and names him Moses. As a young man, Moses leaves the palace and discovers the hardship of his brethren. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew and kills the Egyptian. The next day, he sees two Jews fighting. When he admonishes them, they reveal his deed of the previous day, and Moses is forced to flee to Midian. There, he rescues Jethro's daughters, marries one of them, Zipporah, and becomes a shepherd of his father-in-law's flocks. God appears to Moses in a burning bush at the foot of Mount Sinai and instructs him to go.
Oh, sorry, I clicked. One sec. Playing up. Sorry, here you go.
That's okay. And instructs him to go to Pharaoh and demand, "Let my people go so that they may serve me." Moses' brother Aaron is appointed to serve as his spokesman. In Egypt, Moses and Aaron assemble the elders of Israel to tell them that the time of their redemption has come. The people believe, but Pharaoh refuses to let them go and even intensifies the suffering of Israel. Moses returns to God to protest. "Why have you done evil to this people?" God promises that the redemption is close at hand.
Okay, so lots happening this week. Yeah. The end of last week, Joseph said, don't worry, there'll come a time when you'll be redeemed, and it's all happening this week. I'm sure you all saw my posting. I'm just looking this up quickly. Where was it? 1 second. Sorry. Last year, when Xmas coincided with Parsha Shemot, right? And the 25th of December was a Shabbos. I put a post. Tomorrow, millions of people around the world will be celebrating the birth of the Savior of the Jews, recounting stories of his birth and the light that filled the small hut where he was born, how he suffered for his people and became a champion of the underdog. I am, of course, referring to Moses. Who else did you think I meant? Right? So this week's Edra could be the birth of a leader. It's Moshe is introduced to us. Right? He's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He grows up, as we know, the Prince of Egypt. We see him as a young man. He realizes his identity. And he goes back and he identifies with his people, right? That's quite a strong theme of this week's Sedra, which we're going to talk about in due course. But there's another aspect to this week's Sedra. Let's have a look at a very famous midrash. Piece of Talmud. Who would like to read number 1?
I haven't got that much to do now, so come inside.
Oh, we've got a twin with us as well. Hello, twin. Who wants to read?
It's Bella.
Hi, Bella.
Hello, Bella.
I didn't want to get it wrong. Right. Okay.
It's okay.
Hi, Bella.
Hi.
Since you're on, Pam, do you want to just read that number 1?
Okay. Rabbi Akiva, Avira expounded, as the reward for the righteous women who lived in that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt.
Right. You've probably heard this.
Rabbi, when we made those Iris, do you remember when we made those tambourines?
Yes.
I think I wrote something like that on mine.
That was probably the quote. This is a very famous quote, right? Yeah. Very famous quote that it was in the merit of the women that they were redeemed. So we're going to look at some of those merits today and some of those women that are behind the scenes. Excuse me. So, but before we do that, let's just go back to Moshe for a minute. That's a very important midrash. It's quoted many, many times. The special spiritual quality of women that they brought about redemption in Egypt. Anyone know how, by the way?
Wasn't it because they were when Pharaoh ordered the boys to be killed? The men decided not to sleep with their wives rather than have children that were going to be killed. Right. But then Miriam, I believe it was,
that's right,
said to her father, "You're being worse than Pharaoh because you men are not allowing even girls to be born, whereas Pharaoh's only trying to kill the boys, but you're killing the girls as well."
That's slide number 3.
The men went back to their wives.
Very good, Iris. You've basically just given almost the entire text of slide number 3, which is on the Midrash. So well done.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Don't be sorry. It's good. Right. Okay. So yes, 100% correct. Amongst other things, we're going to see some other things as well. We've got 2 midwives, Shifra and Purah, which according to some opinions are Yocheved and Miriam, who of course, last year, I was looking at last year's share, we talked about their defying Pharaoh's orders, right? When they were ordered to kill the babies and they refused. And we actually talked last year about people refusing to follow orders. This might be the first time sort of recorded that you have this classic situation of following orders, right?
Rabbi, they didn't actually say we're not going to do it. What they were saying was
they made excuses.
We can't do it.
Yeah, they said we can't.
Because,
we can't
because the women have their babies too quickly.
Yes, correct.
So they weren't actually refusing.
But yeah, they still could have got in trouble, I think. Since last Friday was Gary Zilberschatz's first yacht site. Does everyone know? Did I tell the story that he told about his father and about this? Gary's dad was a survivor, and every year he used to take him to do paperwork to get his, I don't know what they call it, pension from Germany, basically. And they had to get a form signed just to say basically he was still alive and he was getting that year's payments. And it had to be signed by someone official, so they could take it into a council office or a police station. And Gary said, I mean, I didn't know Gary's dad, and some of you will probably know this. In the later years, he wasn't as mobile, and he used to have to take him in the taxi. It took a few hours to get him out places. Anyway, this particular year, they had to get this pension form signed. So he took his dad to the police station as they had previous years. It was quite a performance. And they get into the front office, and there's a young lady behind the counter. She says, "What can I do for you?" And they say, "Well, my dad's come to get his papers signed for his refugee pension, whatever you call it." And she says, "Oh, I don't think we can do that anymore. Sorry, you have to take it into the council." So he says, well, young lady, look at my father. It took hours to get him here. It's not going to be easy to go out again. This is really, not easy at all. And we really need your help. And she said, I'm really sorry. I'm just following orders. So Gary said, I can imagine him saying it both humorously, but very seriously. Young lady, it's people just following orders that got my dad into this situation in the first place. Anyway, the story goes, she signed the form. So last year we discussed the issue of following orders and Shifra and Pua. This year we're going to look at these women heroines. I don't know if they still say heroines. If anyone's noticed, but they don't use the word actress anymore. They just talk about actors generically. So I wonder if heroes has become, anyway, heroines. So park this very important piece of Talmud here, that it was in the merit of the women that we were redeemed, including, we'll see in a minute, Miriam's chutzpah essentially to her parents. Right, but let's look at number 2. So this is what happens to Moshe. Who wants to read about Moshe?
I'll read if you like.
Brenda, go on, please. Yeah.
Yes. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kingfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one was about, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Well, somebody must have seen him.
Right. So,
he
know
probably
they did, right?
thought that the slaves wouldn't give him away.
Right. So Datan and Aviram, of course, are the two that then threatened to report him, right? So there's twice, he intervenes 3 times. He intervenes the first time here, which is really the first time he comes out with his kind of Jewish identity, right? The second time he intervenes is when he sees the 2 Israelites fighting, right? And that's when they say, we saw you. And the third time is in Midian when he rescues Zipporah and her family. So, by the way, there's a very interesting, I don't remember where I saw it, but if you look at verse 12, it says, Vayifen Kovako, he turned this way and that, Vayaki Einish, and he saw that there was no man around. So I saw somewhere, Vayifen Kovako, he turned to the right, he turned to the left, and he saw that no one's going to stand up for this cause. So he did something. So I saw somewhere, if you imagine it in modern terms, he turned to the people on the right wing, but they were silent. He turned to the people on the left wing, they were also silent. He saw that he has to be a man, he has to basically be the one to stand up. No one else is going to. Now, having shown this, if you like, metal, 1 second, I just need to check something. Right. Having shown this metal, does he then get catapulted into leadership immediately?
No.
No, what happens at the burning bush? He's very reluctant, right? It's only when God actually gets angry and says, who do you think you are? You don't call the shots here. I'm in charge. Moshe says, well, I can't speak very well. God says, what, you think you speak for yourself? I'm the one that puts the words in your mouth. If I say you're good for it, you're good for it. And finally he accepts, but he's very reluctant, right? And we often talk about his reluctance. We find other reluctant leaders, by the way. King Saul, if you know the story, right? He was out looking for his father's donkeys, wasn't it, that had gone missing? And he bumps into Shmuel, and Shmuel says, oh, do you want to be king? Right, basically. So it's the story of Moshe's leadership, but as is often the case with these things, there's a bunch of women behind the scenes. By the way, did anyone see the story? It's on a Facebook page called Jewish Mum. Did anyone see the story about the couple that had a child in their 50s? Anyone see this story?
No.
So there was a story about a couple, I think they're Bobov Hasidim, some kind of Hasidim. And basically, it's a very heartwarming story. They've been trying for like 20 years and finally had children in their 50s, it sounds like. So there's a picture of the father holding the baby, and it says, after 34 years, there you go, 34 years, Gittel and Gitti and Fischel Weinberger have their first baby. So it says he teaches in yeshiva. They got married in 1988. They've been trying for years, and they finally had a child. And there's a picture of the father. I'll hold it up. I don't know if you can see it. 1 second. Is this going to work? Let's see. There you go. There's a picture of the father holding the baby. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of people commenting, why is the mother being erased? Where's the mother? Why don't you show the mother? Blah, blah, blah. Right? There's 186 comments. At least half of them are basically complaining that the mother's the one that gave birth and she's been erased from this. So I actually put a comment. I said, number one, maybe this is what this couple want. Why is it your business? Can't you just be happy for them? But it's all the people, the righteous indignation, all people saying, well, she's given birth and it's not even acknowledged. And finally, somebody we know posted, have you ever had a baby? You don't want people taking pictures of you right away afterwards. You want a picture of the baby, the new mum who's still being cleaned up and whatever is not necessarily in the picture. Don't read too much into these things. So I don't know the truth. They're probably a Hasidic family. It's quite possible that she didn't want her picture taken. And not because she's downtrodden, but that's her choice of modesty, particularly if she's in a hospital. It's interesting how many people are so quick to say, oh, she's been erased and this and that. And, it's not the time or the place to get into all of this. People are very quick to jump on these things. Now, I've heard some interesting phone-ins over the years with once there was a Muslim lady who wears a hijab, who's I think she was a consultant somewhere, medical consultant, and she was saying, all these people, it was when they just banned the burqas in France, and she's saying, all these people telling me I'm downtrodden because I choose to cover my hair. And she said, I don't feel downtrodden at all. This is my free choice and this is my empowerment. And who are you to tell me? I don't tell you that, walking around on the beach in a skimpy bikini is disempowering you as a woman because it's objectifying you. That's your free choice. Why is my free choice any different? So I think there's a lot of truth in all of that. I think people get far too wound up too easily about these things, and then people turn around and say, yes, but sometimes people don't even realize they're victims of discrimination. I don't know, but I found that story quite sad that people are so quick to jump on the case. It's perfectly possible that what happened is that the wife is tired and she didn't want her picture taken. I don't think my wife's had a picture taken when we've had babies. It's usually been a picture of the baby or on a blanket or me holding them. Anyway, so, but as is often the case, the women are behind the scenes. So yes, we've got Moshe and the burning bush, but it doesn't say in the merit of Moshe we were redeemed, it says in the merit of the righteous women. So let's look at some of the women behind the scenes, some of whom pop out a little bit in this week's Parsha. So number 3, I think I'll let Iris read this because she's very familiar with it.
In another Midrashic account, she was called pure because of her insolence.
Sorry, just say this is talking about Miriam, okay? So carry on, yeah.
Because of her insolence, which in this depiction was directed against her father, Amram. When Pharaoh ordered the Israelite boys to be cast into the Nile, Amram said, shall an Israelite lie with his wife for nothing? He immediately separated from Joshua and divorced her. When the Israelites saw this action by Amram, who was the head of the Sanhedrin at the time, they also divorced their wives.
Oh, sorry.
Pur told her father, Father, your decree is harsher than that of Pharaoh. He only decreed against the males, but you have decreed against both the males and the females. It is doubtful whether the decree of the wicked Pharaoh will come to pass, but you are righteous, and so your decree will be fulfilled. Amram immediately took back his wife, and following his lead, all the other Israelite men did the same. Miriam was accordingly given the name of Pur, since she was insolent, Hofia Panim, to her father.
Right, there's 2 views. One is that Shifra and Pur are actually Miriam and Yocheved, and the other is they're not. But anyway, so
that's nice.
Is it chutzpah to talk to your parents that way? So I'll just share 2 stories. One is there's a famous story of the Baal Tanya, the first Rebbe of Chabad who wrote the Tanya, that he once caught his son looking at some manuscripts in his desk. And he said, you mustn't look, it's secret, it's private. Anyway, shortly after that, there was a fire and some papers got destroyed. And he called his son and he said, did you ever look at these papers? He said, no, father, you told me never to look again. He said, yes, but there's such a thing as the phrase he used in Yiddish is a chasidische geneva, which basically means a righteous theft. In other words, I wouldn't want you stealing money from me, but to come and peek at my teachings in order to learn Torah, even though I told you not to, that's something that you could do, even if I told you not to. And if you would have stolen them, I would have been happy because it's like, I said, did you borrow my siddur? Yes, Tati, because I wanted to daven, right? So the other story I'll just share is I was driving my kids home on the bus the other day, and the way we go to Buckerstone, then we come to Woodford anyway. So sometimes I drop the kids at the top of Chelmsford Road, the older kids. So I asked the girls if they want to be dropped off. They said yes. So meanwhile, somebody phoned me about bereavements. I'm on the phone, on hands-free, but still I'm on the phone. And we're driving along the what's it called? The new road at the top of Chelmsford Road. And Ethel starts calling me. I'm like, can you wait? Just wait. I'm on the phone. Anyway, So, and she keeps calling me. She says, I said, no, just wait. Anyway, when I finally said, yes, what do you want? She said, you forgot to drop us off, by which time we were a mile further up the road. I said, you should have told me. She said, well, I tried to tell you. So we were saying afterwards, maybe that's an example where, yes, you should respect your parents. We should say, no, I need you to listen to me now, right? So that was Miriam. So I don't think anyone would question Miriam's chutzpah. It's sometimes you have holy chutzpah and you have like unholy chutzpah. So this is holy chutzpah, right? To say to your parents, I mean, it's quite explicit as well in a way, right? She obviously understood what was going on. It's interesting. I don't know how old she was, but she obviously understood the birds and the bees and that what her father was doing.
If she was old enough to be helping her mother as a midwife, then
she probably figured out. Yes, yes, good point. Yeah, yes, fair point. So it was her chutzpah that brought about the reconciliation of Jewish couples.
Right. And the birth of Moshe.
You know, you get this evidently often, yes, and the birth of Moshe, of course. Often I think when there's famine or, you know, you get drops in birth, you get increase in birth rates, things like lockdown and Xmas and New Year when people are home more with nothing to do. And you get a decrease in birth rates when there's stress or trauma. People are not as inclined to procreate. They've got other things on their minds or they plan their families accordingly. So, you know, there were babies born in the ghettos and so on. I mean, there are famous shilas. There's a famous book called Response from the Holocaust, Rabbi Ephraim Ostry, who was the Rav of the Kovno ghetto. It's an absolutely unbelievable book. He wrote down the questions he was asked and he has smuggled them out of the ghetto. He actually survived and he was a Rav in America in later years. And he published his, I mean, heartbreaking things, you know, parents asking, should we do a bris on our children? Number one, they're weak from malnutrition. And then there's the risk of, you know, if we get caught and so on and so forth, and these kind of questions. Which, by the way, you may well know, we'll come to a source later on about bris milah. One of the first things we find in the book of Joshua when they enter the land of Israel is they all have a bris. Why? Because it says in the desert, with all the travel and so on, it was too dangerous to stop and have a bris. So even the Bnei Israel in the desert, who were holy, who were, you know, the first generation, they didn't do bris milah because they were traveling. That's pretty, for us nowadays, you know, people did bris milah in Russia and, you know, and they didn't do it. So as Iris quoted almost verbatim earlier, well done, Iris, this is basically what the Midrash says about Miriam, that she was a very special person. So, so who are the heroes or heroines? So first of all, we've got Yocheved. Yocheved is Moshe's mother. She is the one who has a child, ultimately, with a little push from her daughter, it seems, right? Who is subsequently hidden. And she's not actually named initially, but all her children became leaders. Miriam in her own right, and Moshe and Aaron in their own rights as well. Right. The other thing, of course, is the famous story with the mirrors, right? You know the story with the mirrors, the Midrash?
No.
It says that the copper wash basin in the Beis HaMikdash was fashioned out of the copper mirrors that the women used in Egypt. What did they use the mirrors for? They used the mirrors to do their makeup and to make themselves look nice for their husbands. So their husbands would want to spend time with them so that they would basically continue to procreate because they were living in times, like I just said, they were living in times of great stress. And it's very natural that the last thing on people's minds is you want to bring a child. People actually say, right? You hear people say, I can't bring a child into the world. It's such a terrible place, right? So people think like that. They didn't have birth control in those days. I imagine people simply abstained. They had other things on their minds. I don't know how that works with people's basic needs, but whatever. So it says the women would beautify themselves, which is also interesting because we sometimes have a little bit of a kind of there's certain assumptions made. I think one of the assumptions often made is that if you're very, very, very like orthodox, then there's no romantic love. It's all whatever, arranged marriages and all this kind of thing. And yet we've spoken before about Yaakov and Rachel. He fell in love with her at first sight. And we see here that there's a very, according to that midrash, there's a very real recognition that people are human beings. They have basic physical needs. If you're living in very traumatic times and you nonetheless want your husband to want to spend time with you, then make yourself look nice, and feminine and whatever. And we see from that not only is that a good thing to do, it's not I say this to all the couples that we love before marriage, that intimacy and sexuality and attraction are not inappropriate things in Judaism. We just save them for marriage, and they're private, they're modest. We don't flaunt it, but to suggest that they're not good emotions and good feelings is wrong. We see from this that there is a recognition that, you could say, surely the men should have known you have to go forth and multiply. It doesn't matter, what trauma you're living through, and it doesn't matter what your wife looks like. It shouldn't matter to you. And yet we see that there's a recognition that this is human nature. And actually not only that, but we then take that and transform it into something in the Beit HaMikdash, something holy, right? Something which is so, you can't get much more, I want to say, animalistic than saying that, you have to look pretty so that your husband will want to go to bed with you. And yet something to take that and transform it and say, this is so holy, we're going to use it in the Beit HaMikdash, which actually is reflective of the Jewish approach to intimacy. Which is not a topic today, but we're talking about women and men. So, and there's actually a very interesting, very, very interesting, there's something called the Siddur of Rabbi Yaki, who is it? Can't remember his name. It's called the Siddur Yavet, and it has a whole section on basically preparation for marriage. A lot of people learn it for marriage. And he says there in very strong terms, he basically says that most of our approaches to intimacy and sexuality and romance and relationships are basically poisoned by Christianity. That Christianity has this view that human intimacy is, sinful, and it's unfortunately necessary evil, and that's kind of been adopted subconsciously by people who live in Christian cultures. So a lot of the language we use around things is actually not Jewish at all in origin, it's Christian in origin. A sort of contemporary society view, even in today's permissive society, might say, that's quite naughty, that, they dolled themselves up so that their husbands would fall in love with them again. It's quite naughty, it's, dirty mind or something like that. No, not at all, it's very holy. And yet we use words, people use words. I always say to couples, somebody says, I'm going away for a naughty weekend. Say, what's naughty about it? You're a married couple. It's very good, it's very holy. It's not naughty at all. I know it's a bit, tongue in cheek, but these words we use, dirty, right? Something is dirty. You've got a dirty mind, right? If you're thinking about your spouse because you want to spend time with them, that's not a dirty mind, that's very holy. We use these words that come from Christianity. It's very interesting. So holy is the process of beautifying yourself effectively to entice your husband and to appeal to his most basic needs, that gets transformed and placed at the center of the Beit HaMikdash. When the Kohanim go to wash their hands and purify themselves, that copper wash basin is made from those very mirrors. It's fascinating when you think about it. Anyway, so there we go. So we've got Yocheved herself, who of course had a child in these difficult times, knowing that Pharaoh had decreed that the children would be killed. We've got Miriam, who besides for this famous story, also of course is the one that actually keeps watch on Moshe, if you recall, right? Then we've got Shifra and Puah, who are either Yocheved and Miriam or somebody else. Either way, they're people in their own right. I think Rashi says they were given those names because she would Puah, because she would say poo, 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 to the kids and like coo at them and calm them down. And Shifra, I can't remember where the word comes from, but the one view is it's Yocheved and Miriam, the other view is they're separate people. So let's just see what it says about them in this week's Sedra. I've been talking a lot. Who'd like to read the next one? Who hasn't read yet? Nice and short. Jeff, go for it.
Yeah. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live.
Okay, so yes, they may have come to Pharaoh with an excuse, but bottom line, right? They didn't follow his orders. If you're given orders by a despot and you say, I wasn't able to do it, I'm sorry, the car broke down, or my gun didn't fire, or I don't know, whatever it is, right? I'm pretty sure they're still going to be upset with you and chop your head off, basically, right? It's still disobedience, right? So this is actually, of course, when we talk about the Shoah, this idea of civil disobedience. It came up in Israel for the first time really in history, and now it does pop up quite regularly from time to time in terms of Israeli politics and right-wing, left-wing, and religious soldiers and following orders or not following orders. During Gaza, the withdrawal from Gaza, it was definitely an ethical issue for many religious soldiers that they didn't feel they could follow orders to withdraw from the territories. So you have this concept of civil disobedience. Right, and not only that, but following immoral orders is not a defense, as we know from the Nazi war crimes trials. Otherwise, everyone except the guy at the top would have had an excuse. And that's not true. Many people were found guilty. Right? Saying you're following orders, you can't just follow immoral orders. On the other hand, if you're a commander in an army in a war, you want soldiers that are going to follow orders. So, it's a difficult one, right? You also want soldiers that aren't going to go in the media and boast about how many Taliban fighters they killed, but that's another story. Right, if anyone saw that story about Harry, I don't know if it's true or not, it sounds a bit silly to me. Right, so we've got Yocheved, Miriam, we've got these two midwives. Anyone else know who else? What other heroines we have in this week's Seder? There's two others I can think of which we're going to talk about.
Pharaoh's daughter.
Yes, one, and there's one other.
The maidservant of Pharaoh's daughter?
No, I'll give you a clue. She was what they call nowadays a person of color.
Oh, his wife. What is his wife?
Sipporah, right? She's the daughter of a Midianite priest. She goes with Moshe to Egypt. Not only that, but there's this very bizarre episode, which is like a kind of parentheses in the text, which we're going to look at now, which I've never fully investigated. And every time I see it, it's kind of a bit weird. Because here you've got Moshe, who's been told by God, you're going to lead the people. And next thing we know, it says God wanted to kill him. Who would like to read number 5?
I'll read.
Go on.
At a night encampment on the way, God encountered him and sought to kill him. So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his leg with it, saying, "You are truly a bridegroom of blood to me." And when God let him alone, she added, "A bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision." So
she basically says we now have a, how people used to do, what do they call it? What do they call it? Not a covenant of blood. What do they call it? A blood brothers, where people would the origin of it is people would actually prick their finger, wouldn't they, and sign something in blood. But it was, we are we're blood brothers, we're joined together at the hip. So I believe it's talking about Moshe. So she says, we now basically have this covenant that, I'm not sure what the commentaries say about this, that Hashem wanted to kill him. I don't think he actually wanted to kill him. It says that, but because he didn't give his son a bris, he was technically, that was a capital offense. I'm not sure. But why didn't he give his son a bris? Presumably because because of the dangers of the uncertainties of the time. Not sure. But anyway, Zipporah does it. Which is not easy. Which, by the way, this is the classic case where people say, can a woman be a Moel? So my understanding is the primary reason is that a Moel, not sure why, but a Moel has to be someone that themselves is obligated in bris milah. So therefore has to be a Jewish male, as far as I know. A woman is not obligated herself in Brit Milah. I believe that's the reason. But then people come back and say, well, what are you talking about? In the Bible, Zipporah did it. So it was an unusual circumstance. But anyway, it's pretty extreme stuff. So she's pretty heroic as well. And the final one, of course, yes, is Pharaoh's daughter. She rescues this Israelite child. She brings him up as her own, right? He knows who he is. I don't know if she told him but he knows who he is. She's not mentioned by name. Anyone know what her name actually was? We're told what her name was. Anyone know?
Atia, was it?
Right. So in the book of Chronicles, she's mentioned. It refers to a daughter of Pharaoh who's called Batia, which means daughter of God. Let's see what they have to say about that. The story goes that she converted to Judaism. Right. Let's see. This is the Midrash Rabbah on that. Who would like to read number 6?
I'll read.
Go on.
Holy One, blessed be he, said to her, Moses was not your son, yet you called him your son. You are not my daughter, but I shall call you my daughter.
So this is, as we often see, what we call midah keneged midah, that something we do produces a reaction from Hashem. So he says, you looked after Moshe and you called him my son. So although you're not technically my daughter, I mean, we're all daughters of Hashem, but I think in the sense of possibly Jewish, I will call you Batia, daughter of God. That's a pretty awesome name, right? So she gets this reward. They say she converted to Judaism. Do you know what her other claim to fame was? I didn't know this. I just learned this. Okay. What, as far as we know, what do you have to do to enter paradise? How does that work?
Die.
I mean, first and foremost, you have to pass away, right? And then you either directly or indirectly, maybe through a process of cleansing, you get to go into the Gan Eden and Olam Haba, the world to come. The Midrash says, so the Talmud says, I think, there were the Midrash says, yes, there were 9 people who basically entered the Garden of Eden alive. In other words, basically went straight to heaven. They were so holy. They didn't even, I don't know if that means they didn't go through a normal death process. I'm not sure exactly, but basically were very holy. They basically had a first-class ticket to paradise. So it says there were 9 who entered the Garden of Eden alive. Enoch, son of Yered, Eliyahu HaNavi, that's good to know, Elijah, Eliezer, Abram's servant, Hiram of Tyre, who's the Masons are keen on him, Eved Melech the Cushite, Yavez, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. I don't know what all these people's merits was, but anyway. Bitia, daughter of Paro. Serach bat Asher, isn't she the one that was a singer? And some say Yoshua ben Levi. So anyway, it's a pretty, what we call chashuv, pretty important thing. That she was so righteous, Batia, that she went straight to heaven when she died. So, so we've got all these women that pop up in the background that are very much instrumental in, if not for Batia, Moshe would never have survived, and he was the one designated to be the leader. Okay, Hashem could have appointed someone else, but anyway, if not for Yocheved, he wouldn't have been born in the first place. Not for Miriam, no one would have had kids. Not for Shifra and Pur, also they wouldn't have had kids. Right? And if not for Tzipporah, Moshe something would have happened to him as well. Hashem was upset with him. So all these women in the background, right? And it doesn't stop there, right? Everyone talks about the prophets, but of course we have the prophetesses as well. Anyone know who they were even? Did you know all of them? Let's see on the next slide. Who would like to? Oh, no, sorry. Before we come to that, sorry. So you're going to say to me, someone's going to say, Sally's not here. If Sally was here, she'd probably say, so how come the men get all the credit? Right? Fair question. Is it not often, I always like my joke. I told at my induction, if anyone remembers it, about the mayor of Tel Aviv. Do you remember that joke? The mayor of Tel Aviv is walking with his wife one day. And guy, I guess his wife was quite attractive, and a guy from a building site whistles at her, and she waves back to him. And the mayor says, "Who is that?" And she says, "Oh, that's Avi. He's a guy I used to date years ago." He says, "Wow, aren't you lucky? Can you imagine if you would have ended up marrying him? You'd be married to a builder now, a bricklayer." She says, "No, darling. If I'd married him, he'd be mayor of Tel Aviv now." Right? So it's often the women. That are the partners and that are often the ones behind the scenes that just don't really get the credit. So you could say, why do we not have stronger leadership roles for women, and why don't we have women rabbis, and etc., etc., etc. So here's an interesting Mishnah from Avot. Who would like to read the Mishnah from Avot?
I'll read.
Go on.
Rabbi Shimon said, there are 3 crowns, the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But the crown of a good name supersedes them all.
Right. So question, Julian is a Levi actually, so he's got a slight sort of connection to the priesthood. But, right. So before we talk about the crown of a good name, let's just talk about the first 3. Torah, priesthood, that's kahuna, being a Cohen, or being a king. So what do you notice about 2 out of 3 of those? Well, let me put it another way. Can I attain those 3 crowns?
They're through the father's line.
Right. So I'm a Yisrael. I'm not royal. Personally, which of those crowns can I achieve or attain? Only one, the crown of Torah, yes?
Torah, yeah.
You're either a Cohen or you're not a Cohen, right? It's not merit-based. It's inherited. In Judaism, the royal, they weren't always inherited, but, usually the royalty passed from father to son, or occasionally to daughter. It's not something you can achieve.
Yeah.
So the only one of those crowns that a regular person could achieve is the crown of Torah, right? And then it says that with all of these things,
you can achieve.
All right, and then so it says with all these things, having a Shem Tov, so you can be the greatest Torah scholar, but if you basically don't have integrity and you don't have menschlichkeit, then you won't be remembered for that. But putting that to one side for a minute. Now, which of these 3 crowns can women not attain? The same ones, right? A woman can't become a Cohen. A woman can't become a king or a king in Judaism. She might be a queen, but they were married to kings, right? It wasn't. but a woman can achieve the crown of Torah.
Now,
So it's interesting. So we see that the crown, the roles that women couldn't take on, actually, in a sense, were the roles that not all men could take on either. They were inherited roles. But the crown of Torah, which anyone can achieve, which is merit-based, where women can also study Torah and become teachers and Torah leaders. That's point number one. So the exclusion is from certain areas, but not all areas. Right? And some of the areas that women are excluded from, actually, some men are also excluded from, actually, as it happens. That's point number one. So the kahuna goes to Aaron and his sons, and the kingship goes to David and his sons. They are dynasties. I can't be a Cohen because I'm not related to Aaron. I can't be a king because I'm not related to David. But the crown of Torah, there were many female prophetesses, right? Everyone talks about the prophets, but there were prophetesses. Let's see who they were. Right, who would like to read number 9?
I will. Shall I?
Please.
Who were the 7 prophetesses? Gemara answers: Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther.
Right, I can't remember who Huldah was. If anyone knows, it might be Huldah. But the rest. And then the Gemara, they don't know who she was?
That's it, Hannah.
No. So the Gemara, I didn't put the whole Gemara there, but it then discusses why. Why do we say Sarah had prophecy? So basically, not just prophetesses, but people who were leaders, right? Esther, the whole book of Esther is about, yes, Mordechai's in there, but she's the one that's instrumental to the story. So there's always been women Torah scholars, and there's always been leaders, and even to this day, there was Berea, Rabbi Meir's wife. There were other famous women as well, Sarah Shiner, etc., etc. So, interestingly, perhaps there is a distinction between positions of formal authority, like prime ministers and presidents and CEOs, where it might be you have power, but you don't have really influence. You're appointed, right? Prime minister of this country now is, I don't think anyone, there are people who might say that they understand that in Judaism we have respect for the monarchy because the king and the queen, they are figureheads and they're powerful. Or some people might even say that doesn't apply. But I don't feel that people would feel that you stand up for the prime minister. You bow to the prime minister. It's a caretaker role. Some people might be very inspirational, but by and large, it's a political role. In Israel, certainly, I can't even keep up with who the prime minister is. Right? It's definitely not something that conveys the same kind of respect and authority as old-fashioned monarchy. Right now, the prime minister can make you do certain things because they have ultimately legal authority, or they can change laws or whatever. Parliament can make laws, but they don't necessarily inspire you. You don't admire them. You say, yeah, listen, there's a guy that got elected or whatever, right? So interestingly, and then you have people who don't have formal roles. They're not kings or priests or chief rabbis necessarily, and yet they are influential people behind the scenes. Interestingly, a lot of the great rabbis, particularly those that have passed away in the last few years, that you hear about, like Rabbi Steinman, there was 102 in Bnei Brak, or Rav Elyashiv, not Rav Elyashiv, Rav Kanievsky, was like the leader of the yeshivish world. You hear about them, they lived very simple lives, and some of them had no formal roles. They weren't chief rabbis or rosh yeshivas. They were just like regular people that sat in their homes. They often gave classes, but it's a fascinating thing that many of the great sages of the last probably decade or two were people who had lived very humbly, and they didn't have formal roles. They weren't chief rabbis or heads of yeshivas. They were rabbonim that people turned to. Maybe they had a small shul somewhere, or they gave classes, but often their influence came about, it was unspoken almost. So you have people who have formal roles, who sometimes are very inspirational people, but often they're not. And then you have the people behind the scenes. So if you look at the roles of the prophetesses and you look at the roles of women traditionally in Judaism, yes, they were often behind the scenes. That doesn't mean they weren't influential. Esther was extremely influential. Miriam was extremely influential, right? Just in a more kind of modest behind the scenes way, which probably fits with the Jewish ideas of modesty. It doesn't fit with modern ideas of equality, sorry. Even great scholars, Rambam didn't have a formal role, right? And yet they were influential people. So you have leadership roles that are down to basically your office and your title, which admittedly were generally given more to men. But then you have the roles you create for yourself or through your personal qualities, which is all these women we're talking about, and many men throughout history as well, that it was their personal qualities and their example rather than their official role they held. When it comes to that, the crown of Torah, which is not just Torah, it's good character, and it's how you conduct yourself and how you inspire others. There's no limit to that, and anyone can attain that. Oh. Not only that, but we look at the story of this week's Parsha, although Moshe is the one that is introduced to us as the future leader of the Jewish people, behind the scenes, there wouldn't be a Moshe if it wasn't for Yocheved and Miriam and the midwives and his wife. Right? It's very telling. So people will say, you see, the women never get the credit for anything. Yeah, maybe. In fact, actually, Bathsheba is an interesting one, because her leadership role was not being Princess of Egypt. Her leadership role was effectively going against that and raising this Hebrew child. So the one person of all these people I mentioned that had a formal role, she basically went against that. So we see that it's very easy to get hung up on positions of authority and who has positions of authority. And, if you want to talk about women's equality, we can talk about Cohen Levi Israel as well. The classic thing, I'm sure you've heard it before. There was a guy, I knew a guy years ago, he's actually a very sweet fellow, and I think I would have loved him to get up and bless us. But he wasn't the fromest person in the world. They came to shul regularly, and he was relatively traditional. He used to go out for duchening. He was a Cohen wife, because he told me, I don't feel worthy. And I said, but you are. No, I don't feel worthy. There are people more worthy than I. And, and then people say, why should a Cohen who's just got out of prison for fraud come and bless us just because he's a Cohen? Or why should a guy that shows up once a year on Yom Kippur and the rest of the year every Shabbos is driving his taxi, but because he's a Cohen, he gets to bless the rest of us who are more devout? So the answer is, he's not blessing you because he's holier than you. He's blessing you because this is his role. Sometimes, the mayor of Redbridge spoke at our menorah lighting. He doesn't speak very well, to be honest. He's a nice chap, but he's not very, I don't know if his English isn't good or whatever, but he's the mayor. So he got up and spoke because that's his job. Sometimes you have people, that's just your role. You might not be even good at it. It doesn't matter. That's your role. We say the prayer for the royal family every week. Many years ago, I probably told this story. Just after the MP's expense scandal, our local MP in Cardiff at the time is called Jenny Willett. I don't know if she's still there. She's really lovely. She helped us out a few times with things, immigration stuff, really, really kind. She came to some of our simchas, actually. Jenny Willett, she wanted to come to shul. She said, I'd like to come meet the community. It may have been an election year, I don't remember. And Punk that week, they'd had the expenses scandal. So one of my members said to me, why are we inviting an MP? They've all been disgraced and shamed, and we're inviting them to come to shul and honor them and this and that. And I said, number one, I Googled her, or whatever you did in those days, and her expense record was one of the best ones. Said, number one, she's doing a lot better than a lot of the others. Said, but number two, it doesn't actually matter. When it says in the Avot, you should pray for the welfare of the government, it's not because the government are automatically the salt of the earth. It's because they're in power. So either you pray for them because they're going to do good, or you pray they shouldn't do harm, right? It's the Fiddle on the Roof. God keep the Tsar well away from us, right? So whichever way you look at it, you're praying for them because they're great people. Or if they're not great people, we need even more prayers to protect us. So you have those kind of roles where, it's grudging acknowledgement of this person. I don't like this person, but at the end of the day, he's the prime minister. What can I do? Or he's the bank manager. I have to, he's my boss, or whatever it is, right? On the other hand, you have people who almost, I want to say, earn their respect, who, inspire others. And those roles are basically open to anyone you want. And on the contrary, there are many women throughout history who are extremely inspirational people, who often changed the course of history, which is why we're told it was the women in Egypt that basically brought about the redemption. So the fact that they couldn't occupy certain positions doesn't take away from their power, if you like, because your power doesn't come from the title that you hold. It comes from the influence that you exert. And there's no gender bias when it comes to your ability to influence people. I think it's an important point. I think it's one of the things we realized during COVID as well, because we had fewer formal services. When you're doing things online and you're doing things virtually, you don't notice the mechitza in the same way, perhaps. So in fact, more women used to join us for Friday nights. So I think it's also an interesting dimension to that. So I think we get very hung up in modern society on equal opportunities. But we're talking about equal opportunities to hold certain titles, which may or may not confer a sense of real authority. The real authority comes from being able to inspire others, and people want to follow you and listen to you, not because of some title that you hold. Anyway, so there we go. That's this week's Sedra and a bit about women, which coming up to Women's Shabbos in a couple of weeks. Any questions, comments?
Does anyone know what happened to how patio, sorted things with her father.
No,
Pharaoh,
well, I mean, I'm
about
sure.
looking after Moses.
My wife would probably know the answer to that. I'm sure there's a midrash on it that talks about it. Because we know at one point Pharaoh, when Moshe went into Pharaoh and say, let my people go, right? The way I learned it in Cheder was, you've got this, chutz, they used to use the word shnip, this chutzpah little boy, that he's not such a little boy, young man, who's suddenly coming into the great king, right? And it was only as an adult that I realized that he grew up in the palace. Now, listen, I don't know how well Pharaoh knew him, right? There's the famous story, though, with how he got his stutter, right? With the hot coal, right? So, as I understand it, he was the worst person in the world to go into Pharaoh, because he was one of his own. Somebody who, I raised you, you lived in my palace, I let my daughter basically raise you, and you're turning against me. And that dimension is never mentioned explicitly. But, of all the people, who's the worst person to come and, challenge you is somebody that you thought was one of your own, and turns out is from the other side. So in many ways, that would have really pushed, we say, why did Pharaoh harden his heart? Well, maybe one reason is he was just really cheesed off with Moshe. Of all the people to come and complain, let my people go, your people. You're quite happy growing up in the palace, eating our food, and sleeping on our nice Egyptian cloth they probably had in those days, whatever, right? So, but I don't know the answer to that, but I will try to find out. And also, I don't know exactly how we know exactly what happened to her in the end. I think it's brought in the Tanakh later on.
There was a story that she was Jewish because she was
yes,
there's a story.
Yes, so there is a story that she converted to Judaism.
Oh, she converted. She wasn't Jewish. So he just took a Hebrew slave.
Which is why she took the Hebrew name, or God gave her the Hebrew name. I don't know exactly, but yes.
I think what whoever that was speaking meant was she maybe a concubine who was from the Jewish slaves in the first place. Maybe she wasn't an Egyptian. Maybe she was Jewish from the start.
Yes,
could well be
taken as a concubine.
Could well be. I went to a Jewish school, but I didn't learn a lot. My kids learned. We do Parsha questions with our kids that they send from school, and they ask these questions about, what was this and what did Miriam do? And I'm reading, thinking, I've been learning Chumash Shvius. I didn't know this. It's all the background Parsha stuff. So the kids, Baruch Hashem, learn more than I did. So it's quite possible. It's quite possible. Right. Okay. So nice to be back, everyone. So we'll be back next week, hopefully.
Yep.
And Mazel Tov to Brenda on her birthday, and hope everything went well last night. Apologies that we didn't make it back. We wouldn't have made it back. We got back at midnight, but
I realised that.
Looked very nice.
Yes, it was.
And it's what is it? A month of celebrations or something like that? A year of celebration?
It seemed like it.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. It's all good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right.
Bye, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Rabbi. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know.
I'll figure out how to stop this. Oh, I have to stop sharing first. Right. Okay. See you.